Doug, welcome to the Z Learning Podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. Glad to have you on.
Oh, Zev, thanks for having me here. I'm really grateful that I'm here today.
Awesome. So let's get right into it. You're a business consultant. You help companies become more profitable. You help them maximize their sales and marketing approaches. Tell my listeners a little bit who have never heard of you, just like your elevator pitch, what you do for them.
Well, essentially, what I do for companies or for your listeners, even if they're solos, is I help them grow their sales revenues. So most companies have blind spots and that which we can't see. Some companies have things that are working great, but they're not optimized. And some people, are doing things that they shouldn't be doing, but keep running enthusiastically down that path. And so what I do is I assess the whole situation in the beginning for them, and I create a sales revenue growth and profit analysis. And then from there, we figure out, okay, where can you grow? And usually people grow, anywhere from hundreds of thousands to hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on the size of their company.
Wow, that's incredible. And before we get into some of your specific your process or your services, what's your own background with business before you became a consultant, or like what were you at a company, or share with my listeners a little bit about your background?
All of the above, right? I started working when I was 3 years old for my father's company. So I would sweep floors for 25 cents a week. By the time we were about five and a half, we were put out in front of clients and had to write orders.
What
So
kind of business was it?
my dad owned an electric motor machinery repair company. It was a very blue collar, dirty, type of job. And I used to get out of, once I got into school, we used to get out of school at 11 a.m. in the morning. So we'd go from 8 to 11, and then we go to work. And we
Hmm.
work from, basically 11:30 till 5:30. And so that's kind of how I grew up for the first 19 years of my life. And I built some side businesses while I was working with my dad, and then went
Was
into
it
the
was this
mill.
sorry? Was this in New Hampshire?
This was in Massachusetts. I grew up in a place called Newburyport, Massachusetts,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is the birthplace of the Coast Guard, right? It's a
Mhm.
nice little city. And then, I moved to New Hampshire for tax reasons, quite frankly, because, one day I was looking at my numbers and I'm like, man, if I just moved like a mile to the north, two
Mhm.
miles, I saved myself $9,000 a year. And now
Not
it's,
bad.
now it's six figures a year. So it makes more sense on the savings side. But so yeah, so I jumped the line, and I'm literally 3 miles from Newburyport, Massachusetts. So yeah, and then I got out of the military. I built a bunch of businesses while I was even in the military. A lot of smaller ones, five-figure, multi-five, six-figure, multi-six-figure businesses. And then I decided, well, I'm out of the military. I probably should go to school and get my degrees. So I did. Got out, realized that I was making more selling music equipment while I was in college than I was while I had a nuclear medicine degree and a couple other things. So, and I was having more fun, right? So I got to work with some of the biggest bands in the world, selling them music equipment. It was great. Aerosmith, Billy Joel's people, Paul McCartney's people, um,
Cool.
Eagles. Yeah, all those guys. They were really good people. And somewhere around that time where the business of selling and the business of me being in medicine kind of collided, I was like, you know what? I'm making three times more what I was making in nuclear medicine as somebody who's selling. So why don't I go out and do that? And that's what I did. So I went out and I became the number one representative for a very large company. They sold that company off for a couple $1 billion. And from there, I went, okay, there's something to this. But while I was doing all of this, I was coaching people throughout the process, like because I had enough business experience and I had enough sales experience, so people's revenues were starting to go up. What ended up happening? I started a telecommunications consulting business, and I helped a man named Jay Conrad Levinson, who wrote a book series called Guerrilla Marketing. And Jay introduced me to other people who he thought I could help. One was Chet Holmes, who wrote a book called The Ultimate Sales Machine. I ended up becoming Chet's #1 grossing coach in his first 4 months. And then I ended up becoming the president of training and sales for his company as an independent. And eventually Tony Robbins wanted to buy in, so he came on. So then I ended up becoming Tony's president of training and sales.
Wow.
And so it just kind of mushroomed on and on. And during that time, because we were dealing with a business to business audience, we were driving 1,000 to 3,000 leads a week on average through that business. And I got a chance to work with a lot of people. And that's really where it started clicking in, that I actually, knew something that people actually needed, because I thought everybody had this, right?
Quick question. Were you in that documentary with about Tony Robbins? I Am Not Your Guru.
No, I'm not in the documentary. I know
Okay.
exactly what you're talking about. It's, I wasn't in that particular documentary though.
Okay, there was a guy. I was just remembering it. I thought you looked like maybe familiar. Very interesting. So, I just wanted to pause here for a moment. I've talked to a lot of business consultants, sales and marketing gurus, and I've also talked with a lot of other entrepreneurs, on this podcast. And in my own experience, my own journey, and the conclusion I've drawn from a lot of it is that the key to one of the most important keys to success seems to be the ability to manage your time, the ability to be disciplined and focused, and really. So I'm always trying to work on accelerating my time management skills and things like that. My question for you is: do you feel that your background, working from a young age in your family business and the discipline of the military, do you credit those things with what I assume that you have a really, really good, you probably have a really strong time management ability that probably comes from that background? Would you say that is a big reason why you've been able to do so many things and see so much success?
I think that's a factor in it. My company's called Business Success Factors, right? So there's lots of these little factors or bigger factors that add up. I think time management is certainly one. I look at time as time allocation versus time management, because managing time is impossible. A lot of people talk about, well, I can manage my time. No, you can't, because there are going to be things that just come up. You're just not going to, so while I'll manage breaks in my time schedule. Oh, okay, great. Now what do you do with your breaks? Right. So I look at it as, okay, what are we going to allocate time for the value and the return that we're getting? And does that make sense? Sometimes it makes sense to me, Zev, just to say, you know what, I'm stressed out of my mind like everybody else in the world at this point. I've had, whatever, personal issues going on, business issues going on, whatever. You know what, I'm taking 30 minutes and I'm going to take a walk. Right? Because that value exchange of me giving up the money coming in on a client bill at that point, it's worth more to me to go out and actually take the walk. Why? I'm a heck of a lot more focused when I'm done with that walk, and I do better work. So my clients get better results.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it's all about allocating time versus really managing it. And I've never known any successful entrepreneur that's been able to really manage their time. They all tend to allocate it toward what gives them the biggest return for their investment, right, in that time. So, I know people who work 3 hours a day and they make $1 million a year, right? So they're able to leverage a lot into that 3 hours.
The 4-hour work week. Tim Ferriss.
Yeah, I mean, it really, I like Tim as, I don't know him as a person, but I like his book. And I can see the value in what he does. What I don't agree with Tim is in his book is that it takes a skill set to understand how to learn to do that type of thing. And what people don't say is, listen, you know what? Oh, wow, look at this person. They're really successful. They don't look at all the years they were unsuccessful.
Right.
And so, or struggling, or successful and then had upsets and, overturns in their life. That what we see is that snapshot in the moment of, oh, look at, Oprah, right?
Right.
She's Oprah, right? Well, it took a long time for her to get to Oprah. And if anybody's ever, talked or read books, about Oprah, you'll find out she went through a lot of growth periods in her life and a lot of mistakes. And that happens to everybody. I mean, Tony, told me things like this. I'm working right now talking with a guy who's got a $500 million company, and he built it from ground up. And we were just talking about this exact thing. He's like, oh yeah. And he was saying, wow, we tried this, that didn't work. We tried this didn't work. That cost us 300,000. That cost us this, right? So
Right.
we all learn as we go along. And what I disagree with is that, okay, you can come out of the box and maybe that you're that 1/4 of 1% who actually can implement that type of thing.
Right.
But if you're in a startup phase of a business, nothing should be on anybody's mind, but how do I get that from 0 to $1 million? And how do I do that? If I have to work and work and work and work and work, that's fine. Because if we don't get a business up to, a certain level, we can't use the cash flow that comes from that business to actually reinvest in it to get the leverage
Yeah.
so that we could scale it beyond that.
Yeah. Let's dig into that. And maybe this is an opportunity where you could share some of your services and your specific programs and ways you help people increase revenue and maximize profit. I think where a lot of entrepreneurs struggle, and I'll put myself in this as well in this category. I actually had, I don't know if you know Brandon Steiner Sports. I had him on this
Mhm.
podcast, and I asked him something. I said something about how it's hard to start a business or something like that, or for people to start. And he said, I disagree with you. It's very easy to start. It's very difficult to stay in business. And I think that one of the biggest challenges for a lot of entrepreneurs, broadly speaking, is getting their business to that a sufficient amount of cash flow, as you put it, a revenue that will allow them to scale and grow. And I think when you start a business, you have this idea in your head of the why, the bigger vision, what you want to do. You want to grow it. You want to, you know, you're gonna have employee teams, whatever. You're going to accomplish all these different things, but to get to that point, you have to get enough revenue when you're still a one-person shop or maybe a small team to be able to get to that next level. And I think a lot of people have a hard time breaking through. This is just from what I've read and whatever. I think it's sort of that $9,000 or $10,000 revenue, getting past that 9 or 10,000 monthly. Sorry, the monthly revenue, I think, could be a hurdle for a lot of people. How do you help people get from that to that next stage of growth?
So I do a lot of work with consultants, coaches, trainers. Um, I was just talking to a gal yesterday. She's doing $500,000 a year as a consultant, her and her partner, and they're stuck, right? And so we had this conversation, and in about 6, 7 minutes, I said, here's how I think your 3 issues are. And I said, A, B, C. And she said, how did you know that? And I said, I've been there, done this, been through it, right? And so it's very clear to see from the outside in. I think the number one factor that stops businesses from growing, and I'll address the 10,000 mark, um, from growing is not so much the skill that somebody has. You have very skilled people who come out of corporations or come out of, businesses or come out of whatever. And then they're going into another thing, let's say consulting, coaching, whatever. It's a different game.
Yeah.
But what the skill level is about learning how to acquire clients. That can be taught. That has been happening since probably the beginning of time with people, right? And what isn't, and what I find stops people, and I work a lot with people on this, and this was the same thing with this lady yesterday, is we as the leader, we have to change our self-identity. Doesn't mean we have to radically change it, but we must alter ourselves to be able to go to the next level in order to be able to receive that. Otherwise, what will happen is, Tony used to tell this story quite a lot. Say, we have this old internal regulator, this thermostat in our head, and if we think it was supposed to be at, 68 degrees, and we start, going out and blazing a trail, then, we're up to 75, 76, but our identity says, no, 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 you're 68.
Mhm.
We will then start to back it down.
Yeah.
And conversely, if we drop to a 60, we're like, we're better than this. So then we start going out and doing all kinds of stuff to try to generate it, right?
Right.
So part of the game, and I believe about 80% of the success of most people getting beyond a six figure, like starting up as a consultant or a coach and getting beyond six figures, is two things. Number one, a full understanding of what business they're in. They are not in whatever they're consulting or coaching for. The business of coaching and consulting is client acquisition to get a client so that you can actually deliver your expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And number two is that shift that has to happen within the individual. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't even know that this shift is doable because, when we were growing up, we're habituated as human beings. We're taught when little kids, you talk to a little kid, what do you want to be? I want to be an astronaut. I want to be whatever, right? I mean, they can come out with it like, boom, you ask an adult, what do you want to be? And they go, well, geez, I got to pay the bills.
Retired.
Right? Exactly. I want to be retired.
Mm.
That's, I don't understand people who want to retire, honestly, because,
Yeah.
My grandfather taught me, he said, look at the statistics. People die we die within 2 years after retirement on average.
Totally.
So I'm like, that doesn't seem like a very good deal to me.
No, you're speaking to someone from two generations of people who never retired, who literally worked until they died. So I feel the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's understanding that it's all about client acquisition. And yes, you put in systems, processes, all these things, but too many people are looking at what do I got to do long term? And they're not focused on the short term. So we want to build our business for today and get that cash flow going, which is client acquisition. But we also want to look at our business to say, okay, what do we want it to be in 3 years from now? So if I'm a coach consultant, I can get myself to $100,000, and that's kind of breathing room for me. And frankly, that depends where you live. I mean, you live in New York City. I'm not sure $100,000 is
You can never
actually
breathe
breathing
here.
room. Right?
If you do, you'll probably die because the air is toxic.
Right. So, but if you're in, Iowa, you're probably doing reasonably okay. Right.
Yeah.
Or even in New Hampshire, you can survive on $100,000 a year.
Sure.
So, but to go from that 100,000 to that next level, usually it goes 100, 200 or 250, then sometimes 350, but then mostly 500. It's like usually from 100, I want to go to a 500. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it doesn't require a lot of different applications to go from 100 to a 500. It requires a massive focus on prospecting, and it requires a massive focus on getting clients.
Yeah.
And, now going from 500 to a million, that's a different game, because this is where we have to really start. Now, you're going to have to build some systems into a consulting or coaching practice earlier on, or you'll get stuck, right?
Yeah.
Which is where a lot of people get stuck. But once you have enough revenue, you can peel some of that off. I mean, you can hire guys like me. I mean, I told the gal yesterday, listen, I don't think you'll need me for more than 2, 3, 4 months tops, and it's very short money for the quick return.
Mm-hmm.
Last client who took this advice, actually, Zev, you might appreciate this. He went from $140,000 a year in commissions to $2.1 million in 1 year in commissions.
Whoa.
And it was just doing these two things we're talking about right now.
Wow.
And so, going from that 500 to a million, you're going to have to put more processes in. If you want to scale beyond a million, you've got to have the processes and the systems, getting more dialed in. Every company, I don't care. I've worked with multi-billion-dollar huge corporations, Intuit, Procter and Gamble. I mean, they're big companies. There's always some level of dysfunction in any company. It doesn't matter if it's the local florist down the street, doing a couple $100,000 a year, or it's a restaurant doing, $500,000 a year, or it's I don't know, to pick a big, huge restaurant chain, Chipotle or whatever.
Patel. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah. Chipotle. That's a big one.
Right. So there's some level of dysfunction. And even in that $500 million company I looked at the other day, I just had a 15, 20-minute conversation. Well, that was about 25 actually minute conversation. And the gentleman told me what's going on. And I'm like, I'm adding it up in my head. I'm like, okay, he's leaving 5 to 20% on the table.
Hmm.
Right. So that can translate into, 25 million to $100 million gain without, by the way, spending a whole heck of a lot of money to do
Yeah.
it. Right. But they have their blind spots. And so every company or every person, whether we're a solo entrepreneur, um, or we're a 5,000 person corporation, there are blind spots. And so people are reluctant to allow people sometimes to come in and take a good, honest, truthful assessment. And that's what I think all entrepreneurs ought to do. Like if they don't have a coach or they don't have a consultant or somebody looking at them, or just, some network of people that are just brutally honest and say, listen, you know what? Don't do this.
Yeah.
Or do more of this or whatever. It really helps because we can all see from outside the car a different view than we can from inside the car.
That's a great point you make, because I think a lot of people, entrepreneurs especially, some of us are control freaks. We don't want to relinquish control. We want to be, there's also maybe, the type of person, think of the type of person who would start their own business or be a solopreneur. They generally don't want to rely on others, and they may think that, I can do this all myself. But, and also, I'm also a writer. So going on another, I think it's related. You could be the best writer in the world, but it still helps to have a good editor, because when you're writing something, you're in it. It's hard to see that you're missing a comma or one letter, is missing, whatever. So I think as an entrepreneur, you can, of course, edit yourself, but I think that it helps a lot to have an outside person who's unbiased, objective, and can see things from a different vantage point, to help you audit your processes and help you spot vulnerabilities that when you're really in it, you may not really be able to see because you're just too tied to what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, oh, my first book that I wrote called Win-Win Selling, How to Unlock the Power of Profitability by Resolving Objections. I can relate to what you're talking about on the editor because I sent it over and I'm very proud of this. I'm like, oh, this is going to be good. People really get a lot out of this. And it comes back red line, change, comment. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's like, 5 hours of work later, I got to go back. And so we all need that. And the book is really great. It's come out and it's done really well. I'm in the process of writing a second book right now. And same thing, I'm sending it now just to the proof. Not any of the editor, the proof people are coming back and like, do you know English? Right? Do you really understand how to write?
Yeah.
You can't say this in English, right? So I'm like, well, fix it. But see, that's the power of having the ability to have the cash flow. So you could have people like that who are way better doing those type of things than what I am. I know what I want to get across for a thing. The challenge for entrepreneurs, and this goes back to the mind game that we were talking about earlier. We worldwide, most countries teach their people that if you're not an independent person, your worth is lower. And, think about our school system, Zev. In America, when we grow up, if we collaborate with somebody on a test, they call it cheating and they throw us out of school, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, but now fast forward, you're no longer
I wasn't
6.
cheating. I was just collaborating.
You were collaborating, right? Yeah. And now fast forward, 15 or 20, years,
Right.
you're in a business scenario.
Yep.
And you've got a project that's got to get done, but you're really not sure 100% how to get done. What do you got to do? You go work with team members. You go, hey, Jerry, could you let me know? Marsha, could you let me know? Blah, blah. And we put a team together. We call them projects, right?
Yep.
We're cheating. We're collaborating. Mm-hmm. But in our brains, because we're wired habitually for these things. So when we're wired that way, we get to a place and internally that thermostat says, whoa, you need to be an independent. You know,
Yeah.
I think Frank Sinatra with My Way did the
Mhm.
worst disservice to the United States and the rest of the
Oh
world.
man, that's
Whoever
my
heard that
favorite
song.
karaoke song. Oh
I
well.
like I like the song, but when you listen to it, it's like it's like, no, Frank, you didn't do it alone. There's no way he did it alone,
Well, he
right? I
had the
mean,
Rat Pack.
yeah.
He probably had a guy who carried, the microphone to the stage. He had a whole, posse there.
Well, he had bodyguards. My grandfather actually
Right.
met him, and he was
Oh,
telling me, he said, he had two big bodyguards, right?
right.
And so, people like that have a suite of people
Sure.
who are helping them all the way through. I'm sure that Frank was an intelligent man and he probably could have negotiated his own agreements, but I'm sure the record labels negotiated as good or better an agreement, and he didn't have to do anything but
And
just
I'm
show up
sure
and sing.
sometimes they had an offer that you couldn't refuse.
Exactly. Exactly. So again, us working independently, that's one of the things that gets people stuck,
Yeah.
because they go, well, if I reach out for help, then I'm internally, they feel, well, I'm not as good as I should be. And the reality is you might not be as good as you are right now, but that doesn't mean you can't learn the skill. And if you talk to somebody who already has that skill and has already been through the learning and pain curve, I mean, so I've screwed up and, spent hundreds of thousands, 600 grand was my last big mistake, right? I learned a lot from that and I recovered from that, but I learned from that. So when I can see somebody else going down that same path, not because I'm fearful for them, but it's like, listen, can I tell you my life's experience of how this happened? And the other 14 entrepreneurs I've talked about that have done this exact same thing. And what ends up happening is, okay, they stop, right? And they at least think about it, or they deviate and take a different path, or they say, I'm going in knowing the risks. But we don't have that objective feedback most of the time from people. And when people are, I have to do it my way, then they're not going to seek it out. And that's what gets them really, really, really in trouble in
Wow.
business.
Okay. You've given me a lot to think about, and I'm sure a lot of other people here. A couple questions about some of the things you've said. One, you know, this might be a little bit too general and oversimplified, but it seems to me that when you're starting in business, maybe before that first million, um, it's a lot more of a revenue game. You've got to have great sales pipelines and funnels and steady referrals and trying to grow that revenue. And it seems like after that, or when you get to a certain stage, it's much more about maximizing profit, keeping more of what you earn and trying to have, better margins, better net from quarter to quarter, year to year. Would you say, do you help both ends of that? And is my assessment a little too broad? Just
No,
curious, what are your thoughts about
I don't
that?
think it's too broad at all. I think, to go back to alliteration, right? Because people love alliteration. So start, stabilize, scale, right? The challenge is most people either, when they start, they don't stabilize, right? And so what ends up happening is the business tends to get built on their back. So essentially what they have is a high paying job, right? And that's better for a lot of people than having a job with, having to come in and answer to somebody else.
Sure.
But sometimes you're better off working for other people. If you don't know how to scale from that, or once you stabilize, don't know how to get it to that next level, then it gets heavier and heavier and heavier.
Right.
And, I watched my dad go through this in his business. He was in business for a long time. Almost 20 years later, he couldn't take it anymore. He walked in one day, put the key in the lock, turned the lock, left the business, and walked away.
Wow.
Now, he could have sold that business. This was back in 1980. He could have sold that business easily for $1 million. Easily. He had been in business all, 20 years, had lots of thriving clients coming in. Everything was great. But my dad he's just like the business every time. I could remember when I was a little boy, the phone would ring on Christmas and he'd be like, oh, I got to fly to, Virginia. And it's like, when? Now, right? Because it's an emergency, right? So he didn't
Yeah.
want that lifestyle anymore. But
Sure.
what my dad didn't realize was he didn't need to do it all. And we got the business to stabilization, but we couldn't get it to scale because he and, it was a family owned business. My grandparents were actually got in their own way.
Mhm.
If they allowed us boys growing up to have the ability to scale the business, then that business would probably be a thriving company today.
Right.
And so I think you're absolutely on target. You got to start somewhere. Everything should be on client focus. Everything, not delivery so much. Most people can deliver beyond people's expectations. But what they can't do, what they don't know how to do, or they're afraid to do is go out, find, get, and keep that client and then expand the sale. And they just don't understand the process, most of that. But it's not their fault, Zev. I mean, we weren't taught this in, grade school or middle school or high school or even
Right.
college, most of us, right?
Right. Can I just say what you're saying is very validating for me because and this is really everybody's got to be very careful who they take advice from. Like if you're an entrepreneur, don't take advice from non-entrepreneurs or non-successful ones because when I was starting, I think intuitively everything you're saying, I kind of understood the power of freeing yourself up to do the things you do best and finding other people to do the things that you're not as good at or don't want to do as much of. Going out and trying to focus primarily on sales and growth because that's the oxygen of a business. But when you talk to other people, it's always like, no, 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 you got to do everything yourself. You got to do, you've got to do it. And then when you get bigger, or don't go too big, don't get too many people because then you're not going to be able to handle it all. And they mean well. They really care about you. I've heard family and friends, many people say things like that, and I think that had I think I could have done even more of what you're talking about had maybe I not listened to that voice of like, no, I've got to do it myself. No, I can't, I've got to do everything my way, or no, I can't go that fast, uh, because we're all, I think, the school system, generally speaking, and this is an e-learning focused podcast, like I do think, and I want to hear your approach to how you teach these things. But I think we're taught more or less how to be good employees, which you need. You need that. A lot of people are great at that, but we're not taught this go-getter, sales-focused, growth-oriented uh, way of building something larger, or as one book that I really love puts it, built to sell, building
Yeah.
something that you can sell. A business, building an entity that can generate and not just survive, but thrive even without you. We're not taught that at all.
No, 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 no. And you've unpacked a lot here, so I'll try to address it. Um,
It's like
firstly,
therapy.
yes, it can be very therapeutic. Being an employee is not a bad thing, right? I just want people to understand that.
Totally.
Our society and the world society generally teaches people to be employees because my personal belief is the government taxes employees at the highest possible rate and gets their tax money up front on a weekly or biweekly basis.
Hmm.
Right. So they get all the money to work with. And then at the end of the year or whatever, you have to file your taxes, go through all that stuff, and you get hopefully a refund. But you've paid in the maximum amount of tax rate. You have the least amount of tax write-offs as an employee. However, that being said, I know guys who, top selling salespeople for corporations making $5 million a year, as a salesperson, okay, they lose, whatever, 50% of it, but still they're making $2.5 million a year net, right? So it's not a bad thing to be an employee. And a lot of times being an employee is a good thing, especially if you take your entrepreneurial roots and bring it into the business.
Yeah.
Right. So I've done that a lot in my life. Like with Chet Holmes, I was an independent 1099 president of training and sales. Right. But I did really well with him. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, he made tens of millions of dollars on the things that I did. I made my piece of that. And I got to learn from that an education that I would have had to spend a couple $100,000 to learn from other people.
Yeah.
So, same with Tony. When I work with Russ Whitney, guy's brilliant. If you don't know who Russ Whitney is, look him up, russwhitney.com.
Okay.
He owned Rich Dad, Poor Dad. He owned a bunch of
Oh,
brands, right?
yeah.
So not a lot of people know who he is, but the reality is, and I'm still good friends with him today. I learned a tremendous amount from him, more than he ever paid me, right? For.
Right.
So we got to learn to grow. And, I think Robert Kiyosaki wrote in a book one time, don't work to earn, work to learn, something of that. I
I
might be
like that.
paraphrasing.
Mm.
So, the reason we're not taught sales, and then if you look at it, I mean, if you ask somebody, what do you think of a salesperson? They'll come up with all these like used car guy or whatever, right? I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of negative stuff. And the industry itself got that from years and years and years and years ago of, the old tin man selling and the old methodologies where it was just, come top down on people,
Yeah.
and a battle of wills. Today, selling is totally different.
Yeah.
That's why I called the book Win-Win Selling, because if we don't know how to communicate and help them in a win-win fashion,
Hmm.
they win, we win in a respectful manner, there's too many options out there for people to buy today. I mean, with a
Yeah.
click of a mouse, they can get almost anything they want.
Yeah.
So we have to build relationships, but I think people are not taught the leverage game of sales. And that's what I learned early on with my dad, right? He was putting us out 5.5, 6 years old. I'm writing slips by hand because back then we didn't have computers. And I'm adding up numbers and I'm going, okay, well, we paid $1 for this. We're charging $1.50 for this,
Mhm.
right? Blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden it's like, well, I can get 10%,
Mm.
that type of thing.
Wow. You're
And
learning stuff when you were 6 that I learned in my late 20s.
yeah, and for a lot of us, that's the case, right? Now I learned a lot of things from my dad not to do, like how to build a business on your back, right?
Right.
Which I
Right.
duplicated going through, because again, we're habituated, right? We learn, the old, I don't want to call my
Old
dad a monk,
school.
yeah, yeah. It's we all make mistakes along the way. We learn from those. And then, look, I heard a quote the other day. It said, struggle is guaranteed in your life. Success is not. The success part is up to us to learn how not to struggle. And I thought it was really brilliant because people stay in struggle self-inflicted,
Mhm.
right? I mean, you look at a relationship, I don't know, it's not working out for whatever relation, but people stay,
Yeah.
right? And so they're now putting themselves into struggle every day they wake up, say they're married, husband and wife, let's say, or
Yep.
a husband and husband, or whatever it might be, a wife and wife. They wake up every day and they go, oh man, I can fix this. I can fix this. 3 years later, they're saying the same thing.
Yep.
But they've been in a struggle for 3 years. The
Hmm.
reality is in business, the same thing. If you're in a struggle, anyone listening to this, if you're in a struggle, the struggle is self-inflicted because you have choice. And if we don't choose, like what was that movie with the Holy Grail and what is the Harrison Ford?
The Indiana Jones.
Yeah, and they take in the Grail, they drink it, and they
Yeah.
take the wrong one, and the guy goes, "You did not choose wisely," right? Right? Harrison Ford drinks the one of, oh, this got to be a farmer's cup because it's plain, right? And he drinks it, and the guy goes, "You chose wisely," right? So he doesn't, turn into dust. It's the same thing, but it's a choice. If we are in struggle, and I'm tying this back, Zev, to what you asked me earlier on. Why is 80% of the game the mind, if you will? Because people live in struggle and a lot of them can identify with themselves with the need to struggle. And once we start working on those triggers within the
Mhm.
process, they realize, oh my gosh, I don't need to struggle. I don't need to suffer. No pain, no gain. Yeah, not true.
Mm.
Not true at all, right? You can go in to a gym, do 2 or 3 sets and still make gain over, a year, 2 year period of time, without, ripping your shoulder out or whatever from bench pressing or whatever it might be. Right.
Right.
So I really am a firm subscriber to the fact that struggle is what keeps people stuck.
Wow. Wow, that's a revolutionary idea. I mean, we're all inculcated with so many beliefs, some of which are good and some of which probably need to be re-examined. In my elementary school gym, every single day I would see a poster of no pain, no gain hanging
Mhm.
on the wall. And that shapes us. And I mean, and like you said, and maybe it's especially in America where we're all like we have to be very individualistic and stuff. I had a lot of, what you're talking about the mind. For a long time, I was like, no, I don't want to go to these coaches about the mind. I just want to like make money and like start my, grow my
Right.
business. Like I don't have time for that. Maybe when I'm like, 55 and whatever, no, but like that kind of thing is so that's meant it's a like they say about like football, like it's 90% mental or something. Like same with business. Like it's a so wow, you've really given a lot to think about. Um, Before we end this, just maybe you could sum up a little bit some of your programs and offerings, things like that, where my audience can find you and learn from you.
Yeah, I mean, they can contact me directly. They can go to either my LinkedIn profile is Doug Brown 1234. They can go to businesssuccessfactors.com. They can get a hold of me directly there. They can send me an email at Doug at. I may not answer it initially because I have a couple of people who do that, but um, or they'll pass it to me and I may. Um, they can call us in the company at 603-595-0303. Um, and I generally help companies scale their revenues and their profits as well. And if they're looking to do anything like hire more salespeople or go after big clients or they just want an assessment done to find out where the blind spots are on their business or whatever it might be. We can figure it out. And so I have two segments, basically the companies that are larger in size,
Mhm.
usually, not always, doing 10 million and up, right? And they usually have 5 salespeople and up. Or I also have, the 10 million and down, which is where a lot of coaching and consulting for coaches comes in. In that, I have things like Sales Revenue Growth University. I have conversational sales mastery. Um, you know, uh, get your head in the right direction type things, right? So I do that through either group programs or even one-on-one with people. And for a long time, Zev, I used to look, because everybody used to go, you got a niche, you got a niche, you got a niche.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what I do applies to everybody. What I did for Intuit, which Intuit was losing $10 million a year on a division.
Mhm.
And within a year, we went from $10 million loss to a $7 million gain.
Wow.
Right. And the reality is that it's not that Intuit's not smart. They had blind spots, and their blind spot in that case was messaging.
Mhm.
So it was a situation that they paid a lot of money for, but a person who is doing, $200,000 a year in their business or 100,000 or 300, they cannot afford that. And that makes sense. So I devised ways to actually get the same type of information affordably into people's hands, no matter what level they're at
Mhm.
in their game. There's no one on this line listening right now that can't add 100,000 or more to their bottom line if they're a coaching consultant, if they know what to do.
That yeah, and I think that's a great selling point. Having working and having a marketing advertising agency, and that's one challenge with selling things like this is sometimes, especially if people are taking losses, to be able to demonstrate to them that by yes, spending more money or investing in you, they will start to see a reversal, or they will get returns, and that it will be profitable for them. That it's really an
Well,
investment.
and it's scary in the beginning, right? Because if you're sort of just at that place where it's like, okay, I'm paying the bills, I'm doing fine, but now I know I have to reinvest in order to grow. But if this doesn't go right, then it's going to hurt me versus help me.
Right.
And the truth be told is, depending on who they work with, sometimes they are going to get hurt. I've been hurt. I spent 25,000 with somebody and then 25,000 with another person, all within like 3 months. And both of them I knew more than they did, right? And they learned off of me. So, you learn that game too. You learn how to actually, here's the thing about failure, or, that if everybody's listening to this, failure is not failure. Quitting is sometimes best, believe it or not, right? Letting go of the struggle. Failure is not failure. If you learn from the failure, if one learns from the failure, it's not failure, because in business, you're going to fail. It's just the nature. I always say, Zev, business is so easy. It's money out, money in equals something.
Yep.
Where does it get complicated? When people get involved, right? That's where it gets complex, because it's people have desires and wants and needs and fears, and it's all of that stuff. And so how do we navigate through that? But anybody who wants to grow can grow. But I do agree with you too, and applaud you for telling people, like, watch who you're listening to. I mean, you can listen to anybody, and why it's the old saying, the wise man listens to everybody, a fool listens to no one, right?
Yeah.
The difference though is the wise man will listen, but he, she, or they will determine whether or not that is the right course of action for them, not relying just on the person teaching them. So we can learn things from our friends and our family. And, but remember, most of those people, if they're not doing what you want to do, are trying to keep you safe.
Yes.
Because their own frame says that's what they got to do. So therefore they're imparting that belief system and the thoughts upon the other individual, just so they can remain safe. And here's another thing for the audience. When you grow and you start getting into places like, let's say that you're a coach consultant, you're starting out like you were talking about, Zev, and they're going from, zero to, $250,000, right? But all their friends are making 75, 80, $100,000. Some of their friends are going to probably abandon them at that point. If they start making $500,000, $1 million, they'll start saying things like, oh, well, he's all about the money, or she's all about the money, or they're all about the money, or whatever it might be. And the reality is, those aren't the right people to keep in our lives anyways. That's where the struggle comes in.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I know this from from experience. And, and that can be people as close to you as your parents. That could be close, your family. It can be, it's not that people are trying to upend us or hurt us. It's just their frame says their thermostat is set at, say, 62, and you want to be at 80.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. So everybody's trying to, bring it down. So, cool. This was fun. I really appreciate it, Zev.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Doug. You really shared a lot of value with my listeners, and I think opened our minds, our hearts, our eyes to a lot of interesting insights. So thank you so much, and love to have you back on sometime.
Oh, I'd love to be here. Oh,